Welcome to Storytime with Patti, where imagination is our tour bus through reality, and everything in the universe has a story. Come, sit by the fire.
And welcome back. This is Patti with Storytime with Patti, episode 7, How I Make the Most of Alone Time. So, a lot of us are spending a lot more time alone or at home, and many people are having a difficult time with that amount of time that they spend at home. So, I wanted to just take an opportunity today to share with you some of the ways that I make the most of my alone time. I believe that this alone time is an opportunity because it gives us an essential time, a much needed time to detoxify and heal. And I would like to share with you some personal things that I do to make the most of my alone time. So, detoxifying. So, a lot of us are spending more time at home, and with restaurants being closed, we have to cook more meals at home. This is an opportunity to eat more cleanly. Before the quarantine and before the lockdown, I cooked all my own food anyway. I don't eat out. So, this wasn't such a big transition for me, but gives me and gives all of us an opportunity to take a look at the food that we're eating and how healthy it is, and are we eating balanced food. So most people now are preparing more foods at home, more meals at home, and this allows us to actually eat healthier, because even if we are eating out at healthy restaurants, it's generally not as healthy as the food that we can make at home. I want to talk a little bit about other kinds of detoxifying. Detoxifying drama. Drama comes at us in many forms, and basically, what it does is it sucks our energy. Now, if you have a dramatic friend and you spend time with that dramatic friend, your energy is depleted. That's literally just the dynamic of that relationship. So, this gives us time to evaluate, do we want those relationships in our lives still? And if we do we want to limit them? Do we want to be conscious of the fact that when we spend time with them, the dynamic of that relationship is dramatic, and there's always a crisis, and somehow, no matter what, our energy is depleted. And so, if you know that that is the dynamic of your relationship, how much time do you really want to be spending with that person on the phone? Obviously, not so much in person, perhaps, but on the phone or on social media. And speaking of social media, detoxifying our lives, really, in my view, and what I do is I really don't watch the coronavirus updates. Every once in a while, or I'll just skim, or I'll look at titles or whatever, and I really don't get into them, because I think that that is another toxic, drama laden element in our world that depletes us. And we don't need to be depleted right now. So I think that it's one thing to kind of be aware of what's going on, but we do not have to be plugged in to that drama show 24/7. Social media, in my opinion, is still very, very polarized. You're on this side or you're on that side. You have to choose a side. And even though this is a way for us to connect, it's not the healthiest way to connect during social isolation. There are other ways to connect with people. To kind of cherry pick who we want to spend time with, who we want to talk to, and so forth, so that we are not just casting this broader net when we go into social media and being bombarded with all of this stuff, which is 90% toxic. So it's being more careful about what we're interacting with, and being more conscious of the stuff that comes at us that's really toxic. And you really know because it does deplete you. Or what happens is it hooks you emotionally, and you find yourself reacting in a way and getting all, your panties in a bunch about whatever was just said, whatever was just announced, whatever meme it was, whatever. You just find yourself all twisted up. And if that's happening to you, then what's happening is you're getting on an emotional roller coaster, and they've got you on this emotional hook. And so we kind of need to get ourselves off of those emotional hooks and say, no, no, thank you. I don't need to be entangled with that kind of energy right now. I'm detoxifying from that kind of energy. You may find that when you step away, you might have addictive kinds of responses. You're like, oh my goodness, I wonder what I'm missing. I wonder what I'm missing in this pull to go back. That's addiction. And so, if you are somewhat addicted to social media, now's a really great time to kind of pull away. If you find yourself scrolling and scrolling and scrolling through Facebook stuff, a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour goes by, and you've just been scrolling, that is kind of this obsessive, addictive kind of behavior that we can nip. If once we recognize it, we can say, I really don't need to be spending my time and my energy in that way. I have found that with friends and family, I'm really selective too. I have found that I have gotten even more selective about who I want to engage with during this time, because I'm very focused on taking this time to heal and to detoxify. And I have had to take a look at the friends in my life and say, is this relationship nurturing me in the ways that I need to be nurtured now? And that's not necessarily selfish. What I mean by this, if you find yourself getting together with a friend and you bring your energy into the conversation, they bring their energy into the conversation, and if it's a mutually nourishing relationship, then you're going to come away from every interaction feeling more energized, more full, more rich from the experience. But if you come away from each interchange feeling depleted, then it is uneven. Then there's a dynamic going on where they are taking from you and you are not being nourished by this relationship and these interactions. This is a great time to take a look at those kinds of relationships. And I've done that and find myself limiting those that don't feel nourishing and spending more time with those that feel nourishing. And what I have found is a real key to determining that for me has been, what relationships can I be completely authentic and not be judged? I know that I'm safe with them to be myself. Those are the most precious relationships in the world to me. And if that is true for you, then that's just a simple question you can ask yourself. What friends and family members can I be completely myself with and still feel safe in their presence? So that is a litmus test that I use as I'm evaluating my friends and family relationships. Okay, so that's kind of some of the stuff that I have about detoxifying. I have been spending a lot of time focusing on how can I take this time to heal? In what ways do I need to heal? And there's some really basic things. I just kind of want to go over them. What they have to do really with daily practices. So I've been able to meditate more regularly. Every day I meditate. It doesn't have to be a certain amount of time. It doesn't have to be a certain kind of meditation. Meditation literally just means sitting in stillness. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to do anything fancy. You don't have to have a mantra. Now, sometimes what's helpful is we can focus on the sound in our ears, or we can focus on the light undulating behind our eyelids. I find that fascinating sometimes. But to be honest with you, it really doesn't matter. What matters is that we are making the effort to put aside time to be completely still and receptive. That's all. So, daily practices. A home sacred space. A lot of churches have been closed, and so people really need to figure out a way to have a sacred space at home. I do have a home altar that has, my special things, and I spend a little time attending to my home altar every day. Now, some people will put things on their altar, like if they have relatives who have passed and they want to honor them in some way, then they can put the little coffee on the altar, or the little sweet, or the little tobacco, or whatever they do. People have all kinds of home altars. Now, home altars for people who are Christian, that may not resonate with you because that is considered more of a pagan practice. But still, even as Christians, as Catholics, you can have a special space at home that has your Bible, your cross, and that is where you go, and perhaps that is where you pray, or that is perhaps where you might sing a hymn. But these are important because many of our spiritual practices have had to return to the home. And this is very much like how they did it in ancient times when people didn't go to churches. Their sacred space, their church, their temple was in their home. I get out in nature every day. As much as possible, I get out in nature. So I have a lake near me and I walk by it and I see ducks and I see all kinds of birds and I see the little ducklings, and I connect with nature every single day. I also live in a place where when I look out my window, I look west and I see beautiful sunsets. And so I get to see the sun rise on one side of my apartment and I get to see the sunset on the other side of my apartment. So there are those moments in the day that are very important to me, and I experience both. Those are sacred moments for me, and walking in nature. So, however, you can connect with nature and the natural rhythms. Having plants, I have plants at home, and many people are starting to grow little gardens, even if they're herb gardens at home. These are all ways to connect with nature. Also, spending time with animals. Animals are wonderful because they're completely in the moment. They're not worrying about the past, regretting the past and worrying about the future. They're completely in the moment. So when you spend time with an animal, you get reconnected to that experience of being completely in the moment. So spending time with a pet is very, very nurturing. So many of us who were wrapped up in like our schedules and everything, people, the family didn't eat together. But if you have an opportunity to eat together now, even if it's just one meal a day, to be able to establish a mealtime is really important. Now, I live alone, but still, I make sure that I set up a mealtime that they're usually around the same time, that I do set my table, and I'm able to look out onto the lake when I eat and really kind of enjoy my meal. I don't like to do other things while I'm eating. That was kind of a habit that I've curved, and I think that that's not so great of a habit if we can kind of just be fully present with our meal and enjoy our meal. I think it nourishes us a little bit better than when we're, say, on our phone or doing something else or watching TV. Watching TV, I think, is the worst when you are enjoying a meal. All that noise. Speaking of which, I have a very quiet home. I don't have TV going on in the background and I don't have a radio going on in the background. So as I move around, it's a very quiet home, very contemplative, introspective home, and that's really how I like it. It's very, very peaceful to me. If you are someone who always needs background noise, it's a good thing to take a look at that now. What happens when you turn the music off? It is not healthy for us to continuously have music playing in the background. It's not healthy for us because our mind, our senses are not meant to be engaged like that continuously, or to have a television on all the time. We're auditorily, we're stimulated, visually, we're stimulated. It's important for us to cut that off. So if you are someone who has to always have some kind of background noise going on, and I say noise, but I mean like the radio or the television or so forth, it's a really good practice to begin in incrementally start experiencing silence and then see what comes up for you. Why is silence uncomfortable for you? Explore that. Ask yourself those questions. What comes up? Do you get anxious? Do you get fearful? Why? Lean into it. Ask yourself, why am I so uncomfortable with silence? It reminds me of that Alanis Morissette song years ago. Books. I'm a reader. I love reading. So there are lots of books that I have been reading. I tend to kind of read 2 or 3 books at the same time and switch off and so forth. Now, books that have to do with spirituality and healing. So I'm going to kind of go over a few. I have some here. So this book, Jamie Sam's Dancing the Dream, whatever spiritual path you are on, this I think is a must read. It is wonderful. It goes through all of the different steps of spiritual development. And again, what is so brilliant about this book is that it can be applied to whatever spiritual path you are on. And I've read so many spiritual books, immersed myself in so many books over the years. But this is the book that I return to again and again when I want that nourishment or I want to remember the importance of spiritual development, and I want to learn patience again with my journey. This is a wonderful, wonderful book, so I highly recommend it. It's Dancing the Dream, Jamie Sams, and she's written other books, but this is definitely a book I think that's really timely for now, for anybody who wants to really get into and be introspective about where they're at in their own spiritual development, in their own spiritual journey, whatever your practice is. Some of the healing that I've been doing has had to do with health. So I've joked, and I even did a show, Fatty Patty's Adventures in Dietland. I've laughed about that, and that is kind of a bit of a shadow for me, but it is something that I've been still continuing to work on. And so one of the things that I've had to look at is my relationship with food. And I talked about trauma, and I just mentioned a couple of examples there, but there's a lot, a lot of us have trauma in that we cover up with weight. And so I have 2 books here that I've read that I think are really, really brilliant. So this one is called Women, Food, and God. It's by Janine Roth, and this is a wonderful book because it really talks about women in particular, our relationship with food, and how it does seem to connect to our spiritual growth and development, if you could believe that. I highly recommend this if you are someone who is struggling with weight and diets haven't worked. You've been really struggling and you want to get to the root of your weight problem. Some people just want to take pills, right? Some people want to do the operation, the surgery, and this and that, but not necessarily get to the root of, the base, the core, whatever underneath the weight issue. But if you're interested in doing that kind of work, I highly recommend this book. If you are someone who has experienced trauma, and trauma is common. Many of us experience trauma in childhood, depending on the family that you grow up in and the kind of trauma. And sometimes that trauma is expressed through weight issues. And so this has been a very, very valuable book for me during this time. It's called The Body Keeps the Score by Bezel van der Kolk, MD. And this doctor began his work with veterans and dealing with the post-traumatic stress of men coming back from the war, and then expanded that outwards. And so it really has to do with how trauma affects our bodies, how we keep trauma in our bodies, like in our cellular memory, and what to do about that. So really, it's written by a doctor, so it's kind of dense. It's not a quick read, but it's very, very, very valuable. Another thing that I wanted to share with you is how important it is to be creative during this time. I have to be doing something creative. It's just really, really important to me. So, there is a book that I highly recommend, and many of you might be already familiar with it. It's called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And The Artist's Way really does talk about the centrality of creativity and how we can nourish, we can have daily practices that nourish our creativity. One of my daily practices, and this is something that she recommends, is I keep a journal. Now, I like to use these, and so I have lots of journals that I've gone through. This one I started on March 1st, and I'm about to finish it. So this particular book is going to be about 2 months worth of journaling, and I'll do anywhere from a page to 3 or 4 pages a day. And what's wonderful about journaling is that it really allows you to write down, whatever's going on in your life, but also ask yourself some questions and be introspective in writing. And sometimes you can answer your own internal questions at some point, and as a writer myself, I find that this has also enhanced my writing. It kind of opens up my writing and brings my writing to a new level. So I highly recommend The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron and journaling. That is something that I do. What else I do for my creativity? I mentioned writing. I started a website. I mean, doing these Storytime with Patti is an expression of my creativity, which I've really, really enjoyed because honestly, I've had a difficult time over the years with technology. Sometimes I'm resistant to technology, and this is one of the ways that I've learned more about technology and I've applied what I'm learning. I had to get some software to do video editing, and I've been learning that and applying it as I do Storytime with Patti. It's like, wow, I have an intro and an outro, and was able to do music, and this is really cool. So I'm learning all of these different things, different effects and such, which has really been exciting for me. And so that has been something that I've learned while being really creative in a different kind of way. Because the way that I've been creative before has been mostly through writing and also through art. I have art on my wall. I have my art on my walls in my cafe. My art hung in the cafe. So, I've been creative in that way, but I've been kind of a little reluctant to work with technology in a creative way. So Storytime with Patti is a great way for me to do that, to exercise new muscles and to also be creative. I've launched a website, Patti Lucia Writes, which has my poetry and my writing up because my goal this year was to publish a memoir of a collection of short stories that would be published by the end of the year, and I am still working on that. But I wanted to start putting my short stories and my poetry up on a website and also created a Facebook page. Those are ways that I wanted to express my creativity during this time, given that I had a little more time. Now, what's interesting is I'm still working because I teach from home, but I've had more time to be able to invest in these kinds of things. So creativity is really, really important. Now, that's not the only thing that I do to be creative. I also craft. I like to do crafty things as well. So I'll just show you a couple of they're kind of silly little examples, but it doesn't have to be really fancy. So on my walks around the lake, there are these shells that I pick up. You see that? That's really quite nice. And I was on my walk, I kept looking at these shells saying, what can I do with those? Those are really cool. I'd like to work with them. Now, I also like to make my own candles. I have beeswax at home and little wicks. So I decided that I was going to start making little candles. I was a little concerned about whether they were going to stay balanced, but the thing is when you fill these little things with wax, they stay balanced. So this is something that I can have here and also can float in water. So possibilities there. But at any rate, so I've just decided to do, these are things that are abundant around the lake that I walk around. And so I'm making these cute little snail candles. Also, on my walks around the lake, there are these wonderful pine cones. Isn't that perfect? So I have decided that, the coming holidays, and they'll be here before you know it, right? And this is an idea I got from my sister Diane. And I'm going to color the wax and I'm going to scent the wax. So scented beeswax, dipped, not all the way, just the tips. And then they can be Christmas ornaments that kind of give off a wonderful scent. So this will probably be scented with cinnamon. Another thing that I really like to do is I like to make my own wines and liqueurs. I made a holiday liqueur this past season, which was wonderful, and I made a chocolate liqueur. I also like to experiment with fruit wines, and so I experimented with a couple of different wines, and these are wines that I did not add yeast, which means that it was just wild yeast, and we'll just see what happens. Again, it's an experiment. It could be a complete disaster. The thing is, it's the fun of it, of just making it, has been wonderful. So here's one example. This is my cranberry wine, and it'll be ready by season. And making a home wine is really a lot of fun. Now, if you are someone who is into the metaphysical aspects of things and intention, imbuing your intention in things, then anything that's fermented gives you an opportunity to put your prayers into it, to pray over it, to do it with intention, which reminds me of another book that I would like to share with you. This is about Dr. Emoto's experiments, and you've probably heard of him, but he was a Japanese doctor who discovered that human intention can have an impact on the molecular structure of water. And through a series of experiments, that's what he showed. So basically, what we're saying is water is programmable. So if that's the case, then you can actually use that knowledge while you're cooking anything. While you're stirring, you can imbue whatever you're making really with your hands with intention, which has been something that I've believed for many, many years. But if you're making your own wine, this is an opportunity. Or you're making your own beer, you're doing anything through fermentation, this is also another opportunity to make something with intention. You can literally write love on a bottle if you want. So that was my cranberry. And I also did something really, like, who knows how this is going to come out. But I really like rose and cardamom. I like that combination. And rose and cardamom work really, really well together. Will they work together in a wine? I don't know, but I made some. So this is rose cardamom wine, and we're probably going to see in a few months whether this is vinegar or whether it's wine. It doesn't really matter. The whole thing has been about the process of creating something, and that's really what it's all about, is creating something from your imagination because you want to, because it brings you joy. So being creative during this time is really, really important. And the last thing that I want to say is self education, learning. Am I learning something new? What am I learning? What do I want to learn? Learning strictly from YouTube videos is not necessarily the best kind of education. Learning something that's a little bit more rigorous, where you really want to put your effort into it. You want to read a book, or you want to maybe learn a new language, learn an instrument, do something like that. That's learning with substance. Learning from YouTube isn't. It's just, we're just curious and dabbling and doodling and fiddling, but it's not really serious self illumination or self knowledge. So, a couple of books that I've read for my own kind of expansion and pleasure. I'm a big Paulo Coelho fan. I just reread The Alchemist. I love this. I would love the opportunity to teach this with my students. This is has a lot of gems in it, hidden gems, and every time I read it, I find something new. So Paulo Coelho, wonderful author, and I would highly recommend if you're going to kind of dive into Paulo Coelho, begin with The Alchemist, and then you can go on to other things if you really like his style of writing. His writing is usually about spiritual pilgrimages. I love this writer. She's awesome, Barbara Kingsolver, and right now I'm finishing Pigs in Heaven. I thought I had read it when I was younger, but I couldn't quite remember. Anyway, I'm so glad that I'm reading it now. She is a wonderful, wonderful writer. So I would highly recommend this. This is kind of what I've been reading now, and it's been such a joy. Also, another book that I highly recommend is Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. Beautiful, beautiful book. As a writer, I love reading books by other authors that just write the way that I would love to write. I love reading authors that inspire me to be a better writer. So I think that that's it for me. I know that was kind of a lot, but I really did want to share with you the different ways that I'm spending my quarantine time and the kinds of things that I'm doing. And I just encourage you to explore all of the ways that you can enhance your health and enhance your life while we are taking this time. My question that I'd like to leave with you is, how are you spending your alone time?